Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Mitch Ashley. I am CTO with Techstrong Group. And kicking things off here, Alan Schimmel, who is just getting connected. It will be joining us in a moment. I'll kick things off, though. Welcome, everybody. As I mentioned, this is DevOps Unbound Roundtable, sponsored by our good friends at Tricentis, working with us on content and ideas and speakers and all kinds of great topics around DevOps. And our roundtable is a live forum where we exchange ideas, interact not just with each other, but also with the audience. So we definitely encourage each of you to contribute, share your thoughts, comments, whatever it is. Start out by offering where you're joining us from in the chat. And you'll see us commenting in chat as well while the conversation is going on. In a moment, I'll have our audience, our panel introduce themselves. And our topic today is AI and the future of software development. I think if you're in DevOps or in the IT industry, I think we're all kind of wondering, so where is all this going with the role of AI, and how is AI generated code or maybe assisted development happening? Or do we have programmers in the future, developers like we have today, or is there something different? And we'll probably hear a lot of different ideas and perspectives about that today. And that's what we're talking about. AI integrated into our tools, into our process, about the ways that we create software. Hey, Alan, are you connected? Are you there with us?
Your guess is as good as mine.
You're sounding great. You're looking great. If you want to take over, I think you're good.
Sure. So I apologize for the slight green tint to my face. I had a tough time in the makeup room today, in the green room, as they say. Kind of stuck with me. No, we had some problems in studio, so I'm on my computer in the green room studio, and the lighting is not optimized here. And I shoot away the video guys who were trying to fix it because we were live. But anyway, welcome, everyone. I can't think of a more timely, relevant, buzzed topic than today's topic, which of course is AI and the future of software development. Mitchell is here in our Techstrong headquarters in Florida with me today, but we have about 15 other people here. We're doing a hackathon this week around operational generative AI and how it's going to impact DevOps and development and ops and everything. And, so my head is chock full of thoughts that I've been listening to for the last 2 days. And, to say that this isn't going to have an impact is naive. To say that it's going to put everyone out of a job is also naive. But there's a lot of ground in between there. And I am looking forward to this discussion. I'd like to introduce our panel, if I may, and I have to apologize. I have to wear my glasses here, and it looks even funnier with this thing. But let me introduce our panel. I'm going to start with he's become somewhat of a regular on DevOps Unbound, our friend Brian Cole. Actually, you know what? Before I introduce Brian, Mitch, I didn't hear you mention it. If you did, I apologize. A shout out to our friends at Tricentis for sponsoring and partnering with us here at Techstrong on the DevOps Unbound show, which we've been doing over 2 years strong now, over 2 years. And we've got some amazing sessions we've done over the years. I encourage you, you can find them all on techstrong.tv. But shout out to Tricentis for helping us and partnering with us on this. Let me reach out first, though. Brian, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. So good morning or good afternoon or good evening, everybody. My name is Brian Cole. I am the Director of Customer Engineering, specializing in performance testing here at Tricentis. The background that I have involved a tremendous amount of involvement in the DevOps transformation that occurred in the quality space. And you can't help but be roped into the impact that the different types of tooling have had in the developer community as well. And with the rise of AI, I've been following this intently, both internally and on our own journey, as well as personally, and just fascinated by the subject.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Next up, again trying to read this on here, make sure I do it right. But Martin Kloss joins us today. Martin, why don't you introduce yourself? And if I mispronounce Kloss, I apologize.
No worries,
Klaus.
Alan. Close enough. I get a lot of comments about, hey, are you related to Santa at all? I wish.
Yeah, you and me both.
But thanks for having me on the panel. My name is Martin Klaus. I run product, technical, and solutions marketing at Tricentis. And I spent many years in cloud native application development, Kubernetes, containers. And one of the reasons why I joined Tricentis is because I believe that test automation, quality automation is a space that's ripe for disruption. And it looks like we're getting to a point where a lot of new technologies are very, very promising. And we're now excited to work with customers and also with developers to figure out how can we remove the pain points and the bottlenecks from the application deployment delivery process. And especially with the new technologies that are out there, there's some really interesting, innovative new technologies that are popping up. And so we're excited to be working with customers on figuring out how can we do this, and how do we create value for our customers?
Excellent, thank you. Next, let me introduce you to. She really is a regular on our Techstrong videos, and she's also a regular in the Linux Foundation on several boards. Our good friend Tracy Reagan, CEO also of Deploy Hub. Hey Tracy, how are you?
Hey, Alan, glad you could make it. I was like, oh no, Alan's not going to make it.
It's touch and go. I hope I get, I hope it works the rest of the way.
And I kind of like the green.
You do, huh?
Yeah.
Maybe there's
looks like Ortelius.
Okay, fair enough. Well, now you have to explain what Ortelius is.
So yes, I am Tracy Reagan. I'm the CEO of Deploy Hub. To toot my own horn, my first company, Open Make Software, we built a rules-based AI product that generated makefiles for over 200 different languages, so we could stop hard coding makefiles. And it is still in some major companies to this day, and we delivered it in 1995. So imagine that. That's what I call sticky.
Yeah.
Today I'm looking at the next evolution of how AI can be applied, and it's all about data. We don't have a lot of data when it comes to things outside of coding, so I'm going to talk a lot about that today. And yes, I'm part of the OpenSSF. I've been on their board. I helped start the Eclipse Foundation. I've worked with the CD Foundation. And I love doing Techstrong Women.
Excellent. Yes, Tracy is a co-host, along with our own Jody Ashley, of the Techstrong Women video series, and she's been doing that for a while now as well. Thanks, Tracy. Our next panelist, and I didn't really have time to go over everyone's names, so I apologize. But Tom Tooley is close. Tolley, easier. Tom Tolley. Tom's an author of Pluralsight. Tom, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, thanks, Alan, and thanks, Tricentis, for the sponsorship and the support. In terms of what I do, I'm a writer. I've written different books on, the latest one is on generative AI, developed courses about generative AI, and over the years, like Tracy, I've been an entrepreneur, founded several companies. But I really look forward to this topic because my background started as a developer back when PC started to emerge in the early 80s, and I was in high school and had not much else to do but to program my computer. And I would have loved to have GitHub Copilot at that time. Probably would have been difficult because I had a computer with 16K of memory and loaded in programs from a cassette. But other than that, I would have loved to have something like that. But over the years, I've continued to develop and create different companies. And I am a subscriber to the GitHub Copilot. So I'm pretty familiar with at least how that system works. So I really, like I said, look forward to it.
I'm not going to make you explain what a cassette is, but if anyone in the audience does need a definition, just pop it into the chat and we'll try to get it to you, a picture or something. Speaking of chat, though, this is a round table and it's with a live audience. And we look to you, the audience, to kind of drive, as Mitchell mentioned earlier, help drive the conversation. So please feel free to use either the chat section or the QA section to put in your comments, your thoughts, your questions, and I'll do my best to try to bring it up to the panel level so that we can jump on it and try to, expand and answer any questions or thoughts you may have. But Tom, thanks for joining in. And then last but not least is my co-host here on DevOps Unbound, as well as our CTO and principal analyst at Techstrong Research. It's my friend Mitchell Ashley. Hey, Mitch, why don't you, I did a good job, but why don't you introduce yourself?
I think you did great. The only thing I would reference is kind of like Tom. I started computing in the early 80s, and I remember
for you, huh?
Acoustic coupler for your phone.
Oh, okay.
And that's going back for. No, actually, I did. I started out doing Prolog and Lisp and a little bit of early expert systems in the late 80s. Sort of my first introduction, which, trust me, is galaxies and light years away from where we are today. That's amazing how far we've progressed. But looking forward to a great conversation with some great friends and panelists today.
It's funny you brought that up. I saw an article this morning that IBM had made an announcement that they're actually using generative AI to allow developers to take their COBOL programs and convert them to Java.
Interesting.
Which is pretty exciting. Yeah. I saw another article. I was talking to some people. I mentioned we have this AI workshop hackathon thing going on. There was an estimate that perhaps as much as 35 to 40% of the code in GitHub now has had not necessarily written by AI, but has some AI assistance in there, right? It's edited it, checked it, something happened with it that involved AI. And that's, slightly under half of the code in there. Now, that's crazy when you think about it. So, to say that this thing has kind of taken the world by storm recently is an understatement. I feel like we need to delineate, though, and define something. And that is, today, and it's been always a problem with AI. To some people, you mention AI and they have visions of little boys in Steven Spielberg movies, or not real boys, Pinocchios, right? Who are not real, but they're AI. And then for a long time in the tech industry, when we talked about AI, we meant ML, machine learning. And so a lot of what we talk about regarding AI ops and so forth is really AI ML, right? It's looking for patterns in data, and based upon those patterns, taking action based upon what you've done before, right? There wasn't a lot of. It's a different flavor of AI. Let's leave it at that. But what really has got the world excited now, of course, is this generative AI with large language modules and so forth. And it has the promise. I was at dinner with a bunch of these folks who are here today, and they were saying, and look, in as short a time as 2 or 3 years, you're going to see this have a tremendous impact in ops, especially in monitoring and what we call observability, which already uses a lot of AI ML. But the generative AI is really going to play in it. But that's not to discount the impact it's going to have on software testing, on software development, on software deployment. And I really, if you don't mind, that's where I want to focus in today. Brian, you always have great things to say and about this. So I'm going to have you kick off, and we could all jump in from there.
So AI is the big umbrella term, and there are many subsets of AI that get increasingly more specific. So machine learning is one aspect of that. Large language models is a different one. As we look at what this is going to change in terms of software development, it is going to redefine what software developers do, which is nothing new. Developers have always had this excellent understanding of how to redefine their job. What software developers used to do in the early 80s and 90s is not what they did today. And then the moment they automated some part of the software development lifecycle, they called it something else, whether that's a compiler or a library or a framework or something, so that development was constantly being redefined. This is going to be no different. When we get into assistive AI writing software source code, the developers are going to elevate to a greater level to become more executive function, the more emphasis on the creative aspects, the drudgery of creating all of the underlying code. That's what the initial steps of AI are going to take off of everybody's plate. It's going to tremendously help the developers in the immediate to short term, and it's just going to get substantially better in the medium term and long term.
Fair enough. Anybody thoughts on that?
I think there's a lot of different ideas about how will this happen, right? Whether is it generating code for me? Is it helping my code make it look better? Is it actually helping me debug code, right? I don't think we've talked enough to the point Brian was making about testing. Think about writing my test code for me, writing test cases, examining things that we've created as humans, and having AI look at it and say, we've got some gaps in your test plan that you wrote, or in this code that you wrote, or et cetera. And so I think there's a lot of paths that could take. You know, Tom and I met at a couple conferences. We were like 3 different conferences. We're at the same ones together, and he was just releasing his latest book on generative AI. I'd love to hear your thoughts too on how that's being applied, because you wrote your AI book, your first book on AI, I think about 10 years ago. So even so, you know, all that still applies, but then so much more.
Yeah, when I wrote the first AI book, more the ML era, and now we're in the generative AI era with large language models. And in my new book about generative AI, I do have a whole chapter on AI generation tools, and I've dug into them and looked at them. And you know, it is to some extent autocomplete on steroids, but even probably a little bit more because, well, one, just like a Stack Overflow, you know, whatever is left of Stack Overflow, you know, that I think that is an indication of what these systems, these AI systems are doing, is that these forums, which have been very valuable to programmers, are feeling the hit, because in my IDE, I can just start, you know, I'll write a comment and I'll say, I want to write a program that, I'll just be very simple, write a function that adds 2 numbers. Presto, there it is. I mean, I don't have to go to Stack Overflow anymore and do my cut and paste. I mean, the dirty secret of development is the cut and paste going to Stack Overflow and putting it into your own system. So, you know, when I saw that, I mean, all kinds of light bulbs went off, and I said, wow, I mean, if I had that years ago, my life would have been so much easier. So I can see why these adoption rates of 40%, which are unheard of in the software industry, you know, are the reality today. So I think, you know, it's still early days, but it's very encouraging. But I agree that the next steps, you know, unit testing, very tedious manual process. But I could just go to ChatGPT for that, and I'll say, I want some fake logins to test my authentication system. Well, give me 20 of them. Well, there they are. I want some whatever use cases. I mean, I don't even have to, you know, I just go to ChatGPT for that. You know, and then I think as time goes by, and I think Microsoft and these bigger companies, you know, Google and so forth, they're going to be at the front cutting edge on this because of their data abilities and all the engineers they have. Then we'll start seeing that refactoring, you know, going into production, all these kinds of things that are kind of the core parts. But, you know, right now it's kind of the advanced autocomplete. But that saves a lot of time. And I think it's providing us a glimpse into the future. And the future is coming at us really quickly, I would say.
Yeah, I'd like to maybe add to what Tom said, because in our experience, I think obviously it seems like we're at the beginning of the gold rush era of software development, right? And a lot of people are trying to figure out what's possible, and they're trying, experimenting different things, and this is really exciting to see. I think Tom, I think your analogy of autocomplete is a good one, because from the point of view of software development, right? If you think back, for those of you that have as much gray hair as I do, if you remember VI and Emacs, there was nothing. there's no starting point. You had to figure out how to write, C or Lisp or COBOL or whatever language you've used in the past. And you only found out at the compile time if your application actually worked, if your architecture worked, if the APIs, which at the time we didn't have yet, actually worked, right? And now fast forward 10, 20 years later, and we're using Visual Studio Code and some other sort of more advanced coding tools. The starting point has moved forward so much, and especially for developers that are building applications, the new architectures for the first time. There's a tremendous learning curve to figure out, like, how do I build an event-driven architecture, or how do I use in-memory, cache, whatever it is, right? And you'd have to learn, you have to figure it out, you have to experiment. And I think one opportunity with some of these large models is that the starting point is moving further even more. However, it's a starting point, and I think I see some of the comments here as well that questions of, is it secure? Can I trust the code? Is it fail safe? And I think this is the counter right now to the models, that these are mathematical models that require supervision, that require human intervention to some extent, and training and updating and checks and balances, because it's not a human. So let's be clear about it. This is sort of like a model that looks at available data and is building some sort of a synthesized sort of idea of what's possible, or what great looks like. But again, it's a starting point. And I think this is where I think there's going to be a lot more experimentation in the future in terms of what's possible, where is it useful, where it's not useful, and then obviously how the model itself can evolve as well, in terms of adding additional parameters and incremental inputs to sort of make the models better.
And I think we have to think about it as code is code. Code comes from humans, code could be generated, but code is code. And it's going to go through a process. So what does our new process look like for using these tools? Should we really be thinking about adding more security to our DevOps pipeline, which is a very important topic? And oftentimes when we think about AI, and these discussions always revolve around the coding part. But the coding part is actually the easy part. And again, code is code. How do we treat code in general? How do we test code? How do we make sure it's secure? And that's where my focus has been lately, is how do we take these models? How do we get the data? How do we start driving better, more secure DevOps pipelines, and being able to generate threat models, for example, based on software, not threat models like network threat models, which we mainly have. But what does a software threat model look like? And that is where I think we're going to get a lot of bang for our buck if we start looking at what these software threat models look like based on the code that's being generated or written. Because I know, like myself, I played with that. I think it was on Copilot. You can create a game. Well, I created the game, and then I started messing with the code. And it wasn't generated code much longer. It gave me a beginning point. And I think that's how most developers are going to use generated code. But like I say, we're just scratching the surface of what we could do with AI. And if we start building and storing a lot more data, we of course, with GitHub, we have a ton of data when it comes to code. But that's really the only data store that we have, or data lake of data that we could start building these generative models against. As a community, we need to start thinking about how do we generate and how do we store the other information of where things are deployed, what it's using, what's the open source packages that's being consumed, what's the impact, so we can start creating these software threat models. And to the audience, if you haven't really started playing on things other than like Copilot or Chat GPT, go learn PyTorch, learn about TensorFlow, because as I think it was Martin who pointed out, their architecture is different. Tensor is, it's a neural net. Finally, it's very exciting. I get very excited when I talk about it, but it's finally there. So understand Tensor and understand PyTorch, because those are the tools that are really going to allow us to create AI software, not just use AI to create some basic code that we're going to go in and tweak anyway.
I love that you were jumping on we're just building the code and it goes through a process. Absolutely. Your code reviews are not going to be supplanted. The oversight of the senior devs looking at junior devs code is just going to morph a little bit into looking at AI generated code as well, to make sure that it is compliant, that it actually does what it does. One of the problems with solutions like ChatGPT is how incredibly confident it is, even when it's flagrantly wrong. It's fascinating to me going into that model and saying, I recently asked it, how many days are there until February 1st? And it said, well, there's 20 days left in August and there's 31 days in January. So the answer is 51. I'm like, no, that's totally wrong. Just completely wrong. Can we count all of the months between now and then? So this oversight is still going to be required for the foreseeable future, but the foreseeable future is much shorter than I think anybody believes it is. Yeah. If it's 18 months, I would be surprised. I think it's going to change very, very rapidly and become much better, much faster than we all expect it to.
I think you're going to hear about some of the stuff we're working on here this week in that regard. I think one of the misconceptions that some people might be under, though, is that somehow we're going to use ChatGPT and its LLM as our tool of choice here. No, sir. I really think the future is organizations will be developing their own LLMs, right, from their own data that they put into a vector database. And there's a ton of great open source tools out here now that allow you to do this. And you create a custom LLM that avoids some of the hallucination and poisoning that a chat GPT gets, from digesting the whole internet, whether it's in 2021, 22, or 24, right? What we're going to need for software development are customized LLMs, right, that allow us, that will get rid of a lot of this kind of
I think that's going to be an inevitable progression of it, but I don't think that's the
I think it's happening right now.
Oh, absolutely, it's happening right now, but it's definitely going to change in ways that we're not going to understand today.
And those custom LLMs, their data set is too small.
Yes.
It creates a bubble.
Don't count on it.
You can't count on it. You can't. It's too much in a bubble. So it's only going to know what it did wrong in the past. It's going to struggle with knowing what that you don't know about because you're in a bubble.
It all depends what data set you have in there.
That's it, exactly.
That's why data is so important to this equation.
Yeah,
for software development.
There's large data sets without having the entire internet.
There are.
Are they large enough? Look at this is the reason why Copilot's been doing so well so quickly, because it has a ton of data coming out of GitHub. So, and that is data coming from all kinds of teams from different countries.
Okay, but it's GitHub's data set, not the internet. Same could be said for, I interviewed him 2 weeks ago on Techstrong TV. Mitchell, what's the site where you go in and you ask questions and all the tech people answer for you? Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow has created their own custom data set. And you know what, Tracy? That's a damn big data set.
It is, but it's reliant. It has a lot of data and it gives you a lot of answers. There's no doubt. But at
not
the
all
same
of them
time,
good ones.
It's not necessarily a good data set. Yes, it has to be. We have to have better data, especially around the DevOps puzzle. So, for example, I'm working a lot with the security, the OpenSSF, and I keep hammering on them to think about automation of tooling. SBOMs are now needed. SBOMs have an amazing amount of information in them, but they're siloed to a single object or a container. And not only that, SBOMs are often not consumed. They sit underneath a build directory someplace. That data, if we could start consuming that data and federating that information, would give us an amazing amount of data across so many different kinds of data sets, different kinds of development platforms. The whole DevOps problem, you do know there's in 2018, CloudBees estimated there were 20 million Jenkins workflows. How
There's
do you
a
add
lot more.
There's going to be a lot more now, right? Because
You
that's
know,
just
there's a report
Jenkins.
coming out at the end of the month on this.
I'm looking forward
The
to
numbers are staggering.
Yeah, there's got to
Still,
be. And so and we're asking them, go generate an SBOM. Okay, you're going to update every single freaking Jenkins workflow, all your GitHub actions, all your Circle CI, everything that you might have been using in the past, Tecton, you know, there's several, Shipwright. I can just go on. Think about that number. Think about if we had a single place for all of that kind of data. And then we could really start building out some interesting generative AI processes that would add that kind of those security steps automatically. Just think you just create a pull request and push it back into somebody's repository. Those are the things that I dream about. Is like, how do we update all these freaking DevOps? The DevOps has got to be disrupted sooner than later. And AI is the best tool to do that. So we really have to think about the process because, as I said earlier, code is code, and we're still going to have to put it through a process. And it's our process that's going to save us. It's not the code that's being generated. It's the process of catching it and starting to build these software threat models that we really just don't have the data for.
Yeah, Tracy, just to add to your point, because I think listening to you and also sort of connecting our own tests and what we're trying to do right now in our own labs, and what we're finding is that there's some really interesting, I guess you could call them missteps that, generative models would make that a human would probably never make, especially from the purpose of software testing or perspective of software testing. For example, we built a model and ran it against our sample application where you basically have to put in a person's name and age to get an insurance quote for a vehicle, right? And you have to pick the model and the make and the cylinders and horsepower and so forth. And then on that application, there's also a search button. There's you can request support. And what as it turned out, one of those test cases was actually generated for Julius Caesar, born in whatever BC, some random sort of persona profiles. And then at some point, it even tried to sort of use the search button to figure out like what to do. And so what that led us to think about is, well, if these large language models are very finicky and very difficult to train to get to the right answer, well, why don't we try the opposite and try to figure out, like, could it be used for things like chaos engineering, right? Because chaos engineering is the exact opposite of coming up with a one succinct answer, because you're trying to come up with any random chaotic inputs to see how the system or the application behaves at the input. And given how unpredictable the models are right now in terms of human intervention, all those things, one possible use case that we foresee in the near future is much more development in the area of you push code in production, maybe some feature flagging, you're monitoring end user behavior, but you use that as an input, but then also look at possible variations to see where have you not covered edge cases in the application logic from a testing standpoint, and then feed that back to the development team to identify issues that users haven't encountered in production. I think that could also be useful for security. They could be useful for performance. It could be useful for many other use cases. But I think chaos engineering could be one of those emerging use cases that AI in general could be very, very applicable to.
Guys, I need to interject. I'm sorry, but we have one of the most active audiences we've ever had on this show, which I think talks to the very nature of the topic today, and we need to get some of this in here. Number one, from Q&A, participant 450, whoever that is, says, that SMEs roles will become more prevalent the moment we rely more on machines. And this goes counter to what some people are saying, right? That all of this AI stuff with coding and development is going to create, cost people their jobs or have less humans involved.
This plays directly into something called the efficiency paradox. And this has been a part of the quality conversation for automated functional testing in particular for decades, where a quality assurance team is looking at buying an automation testing solution and they're thinking, this is going to take my job. And in nearly 100% of the cases, they in fact expand that team and hire more people. It isn't about what you're doing today being taken from you. It's about what your job needs to change into. Everybody's going to move into a much more executive oversight role of looking at what's going on. And this is, again, no different than just writing a framework or using a library. The developers have figured this out, and this needs to be applied to every other part of the software delivery tool chain, where what the QA team does needs to be redefined so that they focus on a quality assurance effort, or better yet, a quality control effort, which is what they actually do, as opposed to writing scripts or writing a test case. That stuff is going to get automated very, very quickly by AI engines, which is great because it frees you up to begin doing much more interesting things like analysis. And if you think your organization doesn't want to do more testing than they're doing today, I guarantee they're going to be very excited about the idea of getting more tests done with the existing resource, accelerating that velocity, having higher quality releases, making the lives of your IT operations colleagues better because the software isn't as buggy or riddled with defects, because you're catching more stuff and fixing it before they ever see it. It's only upside for people when they move into these more executive functions.
Yeah, but I think it's upside for those people that have lived in the old world, where they, learn how to code and, learn the basics and the fundamentals, and they work their way up, and then, they're in a position where they can do these higher level tasks. But if those lower level tasks, and I think they will be automated and probably very soon, then, what about, people that are younger and, are they left out of the game? I think to say there's only upside or this is the way it's been in the past is, really discounting what the future may bring. And, the folks at OpenAI, they're looking at world domination. They're looking at AGI. They're looking at computers that literally are going to be so much smarter than us. Yeah, we'll have, there'll be like nothing for us to do. So, I mean, that's their grand plan. So, I don't know if we really know the answer to this, but I wouldn't be confident, given that there's a lot of smart people trying to change the world in a way to make humans not very useful.
So it's an interesting point. And now we're going to get a little bit existential for a second. But when we talk about levels of intelligence and problems that people face, there are no such things as difficult problems. There's only difficult problems for a certain degree of intelligence. And as machines begin to become extremely capable, every problem that humans are capable of presenting to them can start to be boiled down into, my pencil has fallen off of the table. And the machine will pick it up and put it back on the table. And we'll get to these scenarios where, yes, we'll move into something potentially called the post-resource economy, where there is no need for resources. What are we even talking about here? The machine can assemble food out of air molecules to do that anywhere on Earth. Star Trek replicators, but anywhere. Great. We're probably a little ways away from that. That's very future state.
Yeah,
but that's an inevitable future.
But when ChatGPT came out, I'm sure, who even foresaw that?
Nope, that's
nobody,
the thing.
Nobody. And all of a sudden,
ChatGPT did, presumably. But what we're going to find is,
but there was a huge leap. There was a huge leap in technology, at least for the world to see. Now, those who are in the small world knew these things existed, but all of a sudden it was spread to the world. Same way with GitHub, I mean that's huge what they've been able to do. So this incremental evolution concept, I just don't believe in anymore. I think the pace, I can't even keep up with what's going on. There's just so much innovation occurring.
There's a wonderful article that was written in 2015 that talked about if you brought somebody from 1750 to the modern day, he might die of shock. Listening to music recorded 50 years ago, real-time communication across the world, all airplanes, all of these things that they couldn't understand. And you send them back to 1750 and they're pretty bitter about this whole experience. And they want to do that to somebody else. So they go back to the year 1500. And that person's like, wow, you really leaned into this colonialism thing. But otherwise, the world is essentially the same. To get that same level of delta in difference, you need to go back maybe 12,000 years, where you get things like the concept of being inside or creating buildings, agriculture. This is like the pace of development. The more advanced a society gets, the faster the development rate becomes. We've probably already seen in the 21st century the same amount of technological progress we saw in the entire 20th century. We're probably going to see that again by 2030. So this rate of change is going to continue to accelerate. And the problem with software is you're one small creative tweak away from a radically better system. This isn't Moore's law. This is capable of 1,000-fold improvement the next day. And that's the real change that's coming. And a lot of people are looking at the technological progression based on historical data, which is wrong. That's too slow. They're looking at it based on current data, which is wrong. It's too slow. And they're potentially looking at it based on future projections, which is also probably too slow. Things are accelerating much more quickly than we think.
Well, I don't take quite a futuristic view of all this because I'm pretty grounded most of the time, even though
Are you trying to say we're not grounded?
I'm just not sure what year it is.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. You know, beyond
Ground
the
control to Major Tom, but
beyond the guns and steel discussion, beyond the guns and steel discussion. You know, there was a time when I would have to do a book report when I was a kid, and I'd had to go look at encyclopedias.
Yep.
And when we started using Google instead of encyclopedias, it improved everybody's lives dramatically. And it was relevant information instead of reading an encyclopedia that was written way longer than, if it was a 10, 15-year-old document. I really see AI as a tool. It's simply right now a tool to make everybody's lives better in the long run. In software development in particular, sitting down and writing every single line of code is silly, to be quite honest. There's plenty of code examples. And you know what? I never did that when I was coding. I copied a lot of code. If it was already written and I knew somebody had written something similar, I'd take that piece of code and I'd get my brief editor and I'd rip it apart and add my stuff in it. So we've been doing a level of this for some time. And now we're going from encyclopedias to Google when it comes to code. Instead of finding something you can copy, you can just, you've got AI tools that can do it for you. But humans create this. So we're going to create an entire new generation of software developers who are writing in an AI style as opposed to, a SQL database.
We're already seeing it, right? The prompt.
Yeah, we're already seeing it. We're developing a new relationship with data. And again, here I go talking about data, because data is really where all this intelligence comes from. And it's data that we can easily access, and it's open data, whether it be coming from somewhere like, there's a company in Santa Fe called Descartes Labs. They came out of the lab and they took access from all of these satellite open data, and they created an amazing pattern matching system that could service the military to say, where is it flooded? Can we take a tank through this? Or tell a farmer that he needs to rotate his crops, because they looked at the history and using the data. So these are tools that can actually make our lives better, and it's going to create a whole generation of software developers. I don't think anybody has reason to feel that they're going to be replaced by these tools, because we're still going to rewrite all the software that we have today. And, I'm waiting for the day that the government just sends me my taxes and I can review them and sign them and send them back. So why do I have to still do that? They have the data. Why don't they do that? Or I should have better access to medical information. I should be able to say, this is the way I'm feeling today and have something report back. Why don't we have that? Because we don't have electronic health records. We're not storing enough data in a central place. We'd have to go to India to get their data. But Indians are different than Americans. They have different characteristics. So we really will be creating a better world in the future. And we will be having, the jobs will be different only because we'll have a different relationship to data. We'll be thinking less of SQL and we'll thinking more about PyTorch. And, for a new developer in this area, I highly recommend, in order to really understand how to build AI systems, you really need to understand architecture. And it's very useful to really learn about the tensor architecture because it's the way it manages memory and it handles just how it handles the architecture of your systems that opens up this world to us. And the more you can understand like a tensor architecture and put your head around that, the sooner you're going to start understanding how you could have a better relationship and a different relationship to data that's not just a SQL statement. And that's oftentimes how we think right now.
Yep.
For a while there, Chase, I think you were going to go on a John Belushi rant about, hey, they're smoking dope in the streets of Mexico. Why aren't we? That might be
Well, I was
dating
going to say
myself.
maybe we could replace politicians with AI. After all, it's just.
Hey, I think you'd get a lot of votes for that. Let's get back to the Q&A section. This one's going off the rails quickly. Let's get back to the Q&A section where we've had a participant ask, I think, a really relevant question is, in many ways, AI could be a great equalizer. Because it can favor the little guy as much as it can favor the large org, or is the large org inherently at an advantage using AI? AI seems to be a democratizer. What's the panel's thought on that?
I think it's an equalizer. I mean, I think you have these virtual assistants that cost you very little. I mean, it costs you $10 a month to have GitHub Copilot. I mean, most small businesses can pay for that, and you can ask it to explain the code. If you don't understand what the code says, it explains it. And then as these systems get stronger and stronger and stronger and better, you'll be able to do these more advanced functions. But right now, even as it stands right now, I think you'd get some really good productivity gains without having to bring on headcount. And we all know that finding tech talent is not an easy thing to do nowadays.
Yeah, I think in many ways it is. And Tom's example is a good one. I think using AI and using that to level up what we can do with it. The other side of the coin is, how do you create LLMs and train them? And how do you design for certain prompt engineers that you've done? That we're still at the learning stage. Most of us are downloading whatever, trying it out, trying to figure out how LLMs work and what kind of vector database should we put in front of it, and how do we tokenize and train all these things. Not everybody is going to do that, right? Mm-hmm. But some of us do, and maybe at some point we can have AI do that for ourselves. So I think part of it is an equalizer, and part of it is a new challenge of not only learning what we can do with it, but learning the technology, so then we can figure out what else we can do with it.
Well, that's a good question, a good point. But I think in a year or two, we probably don't even need to understand how to use a vector database or what Pinecone is versus ChromaDB, because I'm seeing products already. I talked to a company the other day that's doing this no-code, low-code system for putting in your company data into the system. It figures it out. You can use whatever LLM you want, and you can adjust it and fine-tune it, and you don't really need to be a data scientist to use it. And they claim it gets good results. I don't know. That we'll know it when we see it. But we all know how vendors are. But I do think over time we're going to have these low-code systems that are going to make it so we don't have to deal with a lot of the stuff that we have to today.
Yeah, and that's no different than it's been before, right? Nobody writes the instructions directly for the CPU to push the bits onto the stack to do processing of addition. You just leverage C, and it knows how to do math or Java or whatever else. I may have dated myself a little bit there. I do think, though, that larger corporations, particularly ones that provide models like GitHub with Copilot, are going to have an outsized advantage over smaller people who just leverage it. Because while I, as an individual, might leverage Copilot to write amazing code, Copilot also gets that. And while I might be using it to make my life better specifically, generally the model will continue to improve and generate more competitive advantage for GitHub, Microsoft, whoever owns it at this point. And that's going to consolidate more. And if I do something truly outstanding and they come to me with a $3 billion offer of acquisition, I imagine we're going to see that consolidation continuing just as it has in the tech industry forever at this point.
Fair enough. Guys, we have, I don't know, maybe 5-7 minutes left, and there's still a ton of questions out here. But I do want to, we always give out $425 Amazon gift cards here on our Techstrong learning events. So I wanted to announce the winners for today's events. Rodrigo P, Pam F, Ellen T, and Anka S. Our team will be reaching out to you with your gift cards, and congratulations on that. So get that out of the way. Guys, this, as I said, we've had a very, very lively audience, and we're not going to be able to get to everything they have here. One thing I did want to, someone wrote in here, there is no I in LLMAI. Well, there is an I, but it's in the AI. But it's something important to remember. Guys, I wanted to give each of you a chance to kind of wrap your thoughts, for a kind of closing argument. And I'm going to let you all, Mitch, I'm going to let you go last on it so you can start pondering now. Brian, well, you started off, Brian. You'll go second to last. How about Tom? Why don't you were the last one I introduced, so why don't you be the first one to kind of wrap up?
Yeah, so definitely lively discussion here. I think, my take on what's happening is, like I said, I think we're still in the early phases of this. I think it's exciting. I wish I had this when I was younger. The amount of, and I think the other thing to keep in mind is the amount of venture capital going into this category of generative AI is really significant. And everyone's, closing down the other startup they had and going into generative AI, and data scientists that were at universities are no longer there and they're working at startups. There is so much focus on this right now. So I think in the next few years, we're going to see a lot of exciting developments. And I don't know what to predict, but I do think in DevOps, that's really low-hanging fruit for a lot of automation. So I'm pretty upbeat and excited about what's going to happen.
I don't think it's just DevOps. I think it's ops as well. I think the whole ops game is going to be turned a little bit on its head. Martin, how about you? Would you like to go next?
Yeah, I agree with Tom. It sounds like, Tom, you're more on the conservative side, but at the same time, cautiously optimistic. I do sometimes think, and just 2 years ago, when you asked somebody, hey, what do you think is possible? And now the conversations that we're having today, I feel like you have to pinch yourself and ask, am I dreaming? Is this for real? This is amazing. I think we live in some really, really exciting times. And Brian, I do not wish to be living in the 1750s or 1500s at this point in time. I'm super grateful for the technology, the innovation, all the stuff that we're experiencing today. At the same time, I do think that one thing that makes humans human is the neurodiversity that we have in each of our personalities, because that allows us to be, to experiment and try things out and innovate, but at the same time also point out the risks and the gotchas. And so I think that's a really nice counterbalance that we need to embrace, to understand what are the risks, what are the potential. I think, Alan, you even mentioned at the beginning the ethical issues, the legal issues, and some things of that nature that we have not explored yet. we imagine that there's going to be a big risk out there, but we haven't yet sort of explored that or tested it in the court of law. But I think that's going to happen at some point as well. But at this point, I would say, learn, experiment, try, try to keep up, make your own thoughts, and see what it takes us.
Excellent. Tracy, how about yourself?
I say go bravely forward into this new world. Take it on. I think everybody's going to have fun with some of the new tools that are out there. We're all just software developers, and we've pivoted so many times over the years. I think the interesting part about this, I think Martin said it, is that, and Alan, you as well, is that I think the ops side of the house is going to have the hardest time dealing with how fast software can be delivered. And that's why I keep going back to where we as a community, we need to focus AI modeling around the delivery of software, the scanning of the software, the security, the software threat models, so that the AI we're doing, we can start pushing it really fast, because, we talk about being able to do 2 or 3 releases a day, or even 1,000 releases a day. If we're going to be able to do that safely, we have to bring that AI into the operation side of the house, not just the development side of the house.
Agreed. Brian, how about you?
Yeah, the general rule is that most software projects spend about 60% of their time doing QA work. So we talked about the impact on the developers and that first tier of writing software and the code, and then how that process is going to take over. There's a ton of opportunity throughout the entire software delivery lifecycle that is going to dramatically reshape both the velocity and the quality of the applications that are going to be coming through the pipeline. It's going to be great. I'm with Tracy. Lean into it. It is absolutely going to change every part of what you do in your job for the better. The tedious, awful parts of the work you do are going to get automated away, and the fun, creative parts are going to be brought to the forefront. It's going to be fantastic. And I hope like heck that all of the companies building these large AI systems don't kill all of humanity in the process.
Agreed.
They do, we'll let you know.
Yeah. Mitchell, take it home.
I think what's fascinating, there's so many parts of this, but in a way, I feel like we're all living the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, because all of a sudden everything is possible, whether it's mass destruction or creating the Star Trek future, somewhere in between. So I think I'm going to rely that for my final thought as my resource of my fountain of knowledge for some wrapping it up. Wayman, in the third act of the movie, he explains his philosophy to Evelyn. When I choose to see the good side of things, I'm not being naive. It is strategic and necessary. Go forward.
Fair enough. Boom. All right. Hey, guys, I want to thank, first of all, to our panel members. Fantastic job. We gave you some red meat and you jumped on it like a bunch of wild dogs. But we had a great discussion with it. To our audience equally. I mean, this was a loaded question, a loaded topic, and you guys came hunting, right? And there was so many great comments and thoughts and sharing going on between the audience. I'd highly encourage, if anyone's watching this on demand, I believe the chat does play in the demand version. So check out all of the great chat coming from the audience, because there was some great stuff there. Thank you to everyone, whether you participated in chat or not, for coming to today's event. Again, many thanks to our friends at Tricentis for partnering, sponsoring DevOps Unbound with us. We have a normal, our regular version, not live audience, DevOps Unbound, I think out in the next week or two. So check that out. And we'll be back in about a month with another live DevOps Unbound. But until then, I think we're going to take a wrap on this episode of AI and the future of software development on DevOps Unbound. I'm Alan Schimmel for Techstrong. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.